The year is 1978. This monster enjoyed dressing up as a clown. Many speculate that his behavior was due to a troubled childhood or issues with sexuality. I know one thing's for certain. This guy was ruthless. John Wayne Gacy was born March 17, 1942 in Chicago. His parents were John Stanley Gacy and Mary Ann Eileen Robinson. His father struggled horribly with alcoholism. He would beat John and his two sisters with a razor strap if he believed that they misbehaved. A lot of this abuse took place in the basement of John Wayne Gacy's childhood home. It really does seem like John Wayne Gacy suffered the most abuse. You see, he really loved to garden and bake and do things that his father found feminine. And because of this, his father compared him to his sisters in an unfavorable way. His disturbing sexual experiences started pretty young, somewhere between the ages of 6 and 10. Somewhere between those ages, a friend of his mother's had reportedly undressed and essayed him. A family friend and contractor had also essayed him. Somewhere between the ages of 10 and 12, he had continued this cycle. He and a friend had been accused of sexually fondling a young girl. Gacy really struggled to fit in with the other kids. He was overweight and unwell. He was extremely uncoordinated, so he couldn't play sports. He had a heart condition, so he's pretty alienated at school, so his father viewed this as yet another failure. He suffered with seizures pretty bad and would have to leave school, and his father would accuse him of faking it for attention. At some point, Gacy also realized that he was attracted to men, and this caused significant inner turmoil over his sexuality. Despite not graduating high school, Gacy did go on to graduate business college in Chicago. He ended up kicking off his career as a salesman and a manager for a shoe company. In 1964, he met Marilyn Myers. Marilyn's father owned 3 KFC restaurants in Iowa, so when the pair got engaged, they ended up moving to Iowa, where John Wayne Gacy ended up managing the restaurants. Together, John Wayne Gacy and Marilyn had 2 children. By the 70s, John Wayne Gacy was a self-made building contractor. He also became a Democratic precinct captain in the Chicago suburbs. Honestly, he was a respected community figure. He called this the happiest time of his life. He even gained praise from his dad. He even had goals to eventually run for state senate. He's also part of the Jolly Joker Clown Club in Chicago. He would dress up for kids' parties or even charity events. He made a pretty chilling comment to a detective saying that clowns can get away with murder. In 1968, John Wayne Gacy had been accused of essaying a teenage boy and trying to essay another. Of course, he denied it all, and many people believed him. He even managed to convince an employee of his to attack the victim, and this was supposed to stop him from testifying. Gacy was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison for this. It was at this point that his wife divorced him and took the kids. Gacy was said to be a model prisoner, and I guess due to this, he ended up serving only 18 months in prison. However, just a year later, he was arrested again. A teen came forward and said that Gacy had lured him into his car. Unfortunately, these charges were dropped when the teen failed to show up to court for the trial. At some point after this, he ended up buying a home in Norwood Park, Illinois. And little did anybody know, this is where all the future horrors would go down. Life for Gacy was great. He was thriving. He launched a business called the PDM Contractors, and it blew up. To no surprise, he hired high schoolers and young boys to work for him, and he made some pretty sketchy moves regarding his business. But hey, he still put on a show as the community guy. He even threw some summer bashes that everybody loved. John Wayne Gacy committed his first known unaliving in January of 1972. He lured 16-year-old Timothy McCoy to his house for sexual reasons. The story goes as John woke up to Timothy standing at his doorway, holding a knife. He rushed to where Timothy was standing, wrestled the object out of his hand, and then brutally unalived him. After this, he realized that Timothy wasn't standing there threatening him, but instead, he was just waiting for him to get up because he had made him breakfast. Nevertheless, this unleashed something in John Wayne Gacy. He had received some sort of sexual gratification from taking this teenager's life. Another known victim is John Butkovich. He was an 18-year-old PDM employee. Gacy lured him there with the promise of discussing overdue pay. Once he was there, Gacy gave him alcohol and tricked him into putting on handcuffs. It was at this point that he was strangled by Gacy. Gacy often used handcuffs, calling it a magic trick. Obviously, the 18-year-old's parents were just distraught. They called the police over 100 times, begging them to investigate Gacy further. By the 70s, Gacy was accused of SA by 2 more young men. He was also being questioned by police about other disappearances. He called these years his cruising years, where he committed most of his unalivings. Many of his victims were buried on his property, with several in a common grave under his crawl space. Another victim was 17-year-old Gregory Godzik. He had been ordered by Gacy to dig trenches in the crawl space. Gacy later admitted that this was to create space for more graves. During this period, period, he unalived several more victims. One he spared, though, was 19-year-old Robert Donnelly. Gacy had kidnapped him from a bus stop. Gacy had taken him to his house where he repeatedly essayed and tortured him. He would dunk his head in a bathtub repeatedly until he passed out. He was even staging fake executions with a gun that was loaded with blanks. Robert was in such agony that he begged Gacy to just unalive him. But for whatever reason, Gacy let Robert go, of course warning him to be quiet. Despite the warning, Robert obviously went to the police. But when Gacy was questioned by the police, he stated that it was consensual sex slavery. And the police believed him. By 1978, Gacy was running out of room. He had no space for bodies. But fast forward to December 11th, 1978. 15-year-old Robert Pice had went missing after telling his mother that he was going to meet with Gacy to talk about a potential job. Robert's family obviously ended up filing a missing persons report, and this led to a search of Gacy's home. Police found several items, and they even found items that belonged to Gacy's victims. They found a receipt that belonged to Robert Pice, so this meant that Gacy lied about not seeing him. This obviously led to more searches, and that's when they found trenches filled with human remains in a crawl space. Gacy eventually confessed to unaliving around 30 people. His trial kicked off around February 6, 1980. Despite confessing, the big debate was whether or not he should be sent off to a mental facility. He spent hours with doctors who ran psychological tests on him. He even claimed that he had multiple personality disorder, with personas like a contractor, a politician, a clown. There was even a police officer named Bad Jack. Gacy stated that Bad Jack could not stand homosexuality. He also said that he viewed male sex workers as weak and scum and things of that nature. He ended up pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, and he went to trial. That obviously did not work for him because he was found guilty of all 33 unalivings. He ended up spending 14 years in prison, appealing and offering contradictory statements. He even picked up a painting hobby in prison. Despite fighting the death penalty, his execution date was set for May 10th, 1994. Before his execution, he said the victims' families would find no comfort from his death, and he even accused the state of murdering him. And what's so sad is whenever they uncovered the human remains at his house, 8 bodies could not be identified. But in 2017, another one of his victims were identified. They were able to use DNA evidence to identify 16-year-old Jimmy Hackinson. He had been reported missing since 1976. In October of 2021, another victim was identified, 21-year-old Francis Alexander. Drop your thoughts, stay safe out there, and remember, not all clowns are funny.